Morning, church. My name is Kate Tompkins, and I'm the pastor of youth and young adults here at The Well. I don't know about you, but I really miss having fun with people in person, especially on Sunday mornings. Whether it's laughing in the halls or having kids run around, grab a million things from the 30-minute party, or even youth hanging out before or after service, we miss having fun with you. So we decided to create 5 minutes of fun right here at 9:50 every Sunday morning so that you could come and have fun and play some games with one another. So I hope you're ready. Hold on to your seatbelt. It's about to get a little bit wild. Fam, here we go with an epic classic, rock, paper, scissors. We're going to do this battle style this morning and have some fun with it. So this is how it's going to go. It's going to be all of you versus me. All of you will have 3 lives, and if in a round you lose one of those lives. If you tie, then you're safe. If you win in that round, you're safe, so on and so forth. So how it's gonna go is we're gonna say rock, paper, scissors, shoot. And on shoot, you're gonna do one of 3 things, rock, paper, or scissors. Just a reminder that rock crushes scissors. So rock would win against scissors. Scissors crushes paper. And paper crushes or covers rock. And so if you win, you are safe. You have not lost any lives, but if you lose one of those 3 lives. The goal is to keep as many lives as possible and not lose all your lives and therefore be out. So we're going to play a couple rounds. I will check in with you after every couple rounds, see how you're doing. We can put in the chat, who's still in, how many lives you have. And at the very end, we'll see who is the ultimate rock, paper, scissors champion. Let's just start with a practice round, okay? So I'm going to say rock, paper, scissors, shoot. On shoot, one thing will show on the screen. That's what I'm playing. You'll have done what you're playing, and then you'll figure out who won, who lost, and if you lost, you deduct yourself 1 life. Are you ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. So if you did rock, you lost. You would have lost a life to the paper. If you did scissors or you did paper, you are safe. You would still have your life. But that was just a practice. Now it gets down to the real business. So get ready, my friends. Round 1. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock beats scissors. So if you did scissors, I'm so sorry, you lost your life. Round 2, get ready. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock again, did I fool you? So if you did scissors, once again, you've lost a life. So you might be down maybe to 2 or to 1 if you did scissors twice, who knows? But let's go. Round 3, get ready. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Paper. Oh, that hurts for those rocks. So I want to know, are you still in? How many lives do you have left? You can just type the number in the chat. Maybe if you have no lives left, you can do a sad emoji if you can figure that out. Let us know how you're doing. I'll give you a couple seconds to fill us in. Get your competition going with everyone else, and then we're going to start again with some more rounds. All right, let's get back at it, my friends. Are you ready? Be prepared to win. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. So scissors beats paper. Paper, you lost. I'm so sorry. Next round, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Scissors again. Oh, is there a trend happening here? Sorry, paper, you lost again. Let's go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, paper. This time scissors wins it out and beats paper. Congrats if you had scissors. So sorry if you did a rock. Another one. Let's go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock beats scissors. So if you did scissors, you're out. If you did paper, you are safe. Once again, I want to know, how many of you are still in? Do you have any lives left? If so, put in the chat how many you have. I want to hear and see from you in the comfort of my own home. Are you guys winning? Are you keeping up? Will you be the next champion? Let us know, and then we're going to get going again in 5 seconds. All right, my friends, this is going to be the final set of rounds. The showdown starts here. Who will come out on top? I want to be a sports announcer someday. Just kidding. All right, get ready, my friends. Let's go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. So scissors beats paper. Oh, but rock beats scissors. All right, another round. Get ready. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Paper, scissors, you are the winners. I am impressed, but let's go. More rounds. Ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Paper again. What is happening here? Oh, things are getting intense. Are there more rounds for us to go? Let's see. Yeah. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. The rock dominates the scissors, but the paper will dominate the rock. All right, final round. Let's get ready. If you're still in, this could be it. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Scissors cuts paper. Oh, if you did paper in this last round and you are now out. Oh, I'm so sorry, my friends. But I want to know, put in the chat, are you a battle champion? Did you win the game? Let us know if you are the battle champion. And to everyone, thank you so much for coming this morning and playing 5 minutes of fun with us. We'll see you next Sunday at 9:50. Love and miss you all. Stay tuned for the rest of the service.
Well, good morning, church. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Urich. I'm on the staff team here at The Well. We're a community church that, when it's safe, meets in Vaughan and Bolton and King City, Ontario, Canada. But right now, along with all the other schools and churches and businesses around the world, we are meeting online. And so if this is your first time to church in a long time, your first time ever, or if this is where you regularly attend, man, we want to say welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us online this morning, and we're excited to worship together with you. You know, one of the things that I find has been happening during this quarantine that seems to be dragging on forever is that maybe some of us are adapting to this as a new normal. And my hope and my prayer for you is that you don't get too used to this. You know, we are made to live in community with one another and to be in relationship. And so I am longing for the days that we get to meet together in person. I can't wait to give you a hug. It will be a COVID-free hug, I promise. But I hope that that desire is still in your heart. You know, this morning we are going to be running our service much like what you would experience if you were there live. We're going to sing together. We're going to pray together. We're going to be taught by Pastor Vijay. He's our lead pastor. And all of this is actually meant to usher you into a space where you can encounter God. We believe that God wants to be known by us. He is desperate for a relationship with us. And so as we sing and as we're taught and as we pray, we actually have the opportunity to encounter God. And so this morning, we would say, even though you're at home, man, we would invite you to participate as if you were together with all of us. That when we sing, you can sing together. You know, some of you might feel that's weird. You're sitting in your living room. Maybe you're by yourself or you're with your family and you don't want them to know that you're a terrible singer. I'm going to tell you a secret. They already know. They've probably driven with you in a car or walked past the bathroom as you've been in the shower singing, and they've heard your voice. They're okay with it. They love you anyways. And so sing with us if you can. Pray with us when you can. Listen and invite God to reveal a new truth, to meet with you this morning, whatever you need. So right now, our worship team is going to continue to lead us this morning.
Good morning, church. I've got my crew with me here to add some enthusiasm to our opening song. We want to sing the song that reminds us that God is the fire before us in the darkness. He is just like a lighthouse. And so we're going to sing this.
My
continue to sing together, church. And you are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace, you are peace when my fear is crippling. You are joy, you are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting. Let's run into his arms, church. So I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough, for nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. You are more, 'cause you are more than my words will ever say. You are Lord, all creation will proclaim. You are here, in your presence I'm made whole. You are God, of all else I'm letting go. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough, for nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. My heart will sing, my heart will sing. No other name but Jesus, My heart will sing. No other name but Jesus, My heart will sing. No other name but Jesus, let it be true. My heart will sing. No other name but Jesus. And oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love will always be enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Light of the world, forever reign. Yes, you reign forever and ever. You reign, and we sing majesty, majesty. Your grace has found me just as I am, empty-handed but alive in your hands. Oh, and majesty, majesty.
Empty-handed but alive in your hands. Oh, we're singing majesty, majesty. Forever I am changed by your love. In the presence of your majesty. Sing it again. Forever I am changed. Forever I am changed by your love. In the presence of your majesty. And forever I am changed by your love. In the presence of your majesty. Your majesty. Your majesty.
And God, we thank you that that is who you are. God, we thank you that we have found the greatest love, and there is not another love that we could know that is greater than yours. We thank you that of all the things that you created, all the magnificent things that you've done, that you look upon us, God, you call us your children, you call us friends. And we thank you for your grace that is bestowed on us every day, God, day in, day out. We love you, God. We love to sing of your praises, God. I pray that you would continue to move as we open up your word now. Speak to us, God, to the depths of our hearts, we pray. In Christ's precious name, amen. Amen.
COVID-19 has dominated the news and our minds for weeks now. So much so that this former news junkie chose to mainly turn it off a few weeks ago, partly to protect my own mental health and partly because they were really only talking about one thing. And it was hard to keep hearing about how people were hurting. Until last Sunday, when we learned that the worst mass shooting in Canadian history was unfolding in the peaceful rural bliss of Nova Scotia of all places. COVID-19 has dominated the news and our minds for weeks now. So much so that this former news junkie chose to mainly turn it off a few weeks ago, partly to protect my own mental health and partly because they were really only talking about one thing. And it was hard to keep hearing about how people were hurting. Until last Sunday, when we learned that the worst mass shooting in Canadian history was unfolding in the peaceful rural bliss of Nova Scotia of all places. And we know now it's resulted in at least 22 deaths, and it's ripped apart thousands of lives and communities. And my heart is broken. Besides the senseless violence and the depravity of randomly taken human life, these families can't grieve and celebrate the lives of their loved ones because of the limitations set on us by the pandemic. Church, there are so many hurting people. Our fellow Canadians in Nova Scotia for sure, but maybe you relate as well. Maybe you've lost a loved one over this pandemic and you haven't had the opportunity to mourn them the way you would like. Maybe you're connected or you are a frontline worker and you're venturing out in the world to serve at your own peril. Maybe you're struggling at home to hold on to hope. As you stay at home, you're battling loneliness and fear and despair. Church, it is my privilege today to bring all of this to God on your behalf. You know, I'm convinced that God isn't silent in times of tragedy or injustice or difficulty. He is speaking and he's listening and he's present and he's so deeply concerned about the things that we are struggling with. Prayer is one of the ways that we communicate with God. We talk and we listen. For 30 minutes each Wednesday right now, we are meeting online and learning how to listen to God's voice in prayer. We're calling it Grounded. And if you have time at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, we'd love for you to join us. You can find out more about that on our website. But for today, I want to lead us in praying for all of those who are hurting. I teach our kids on many Sunday mornings, and when we pray, we actually use our bodies. And I want to invite you to join in two different ways. The first is a posture of your palms being open. This is an act of receiving. And so if you are hurting and in need of prayer today, I would ask for you to sit wherever you are this morning with your palms open to receive the prayer that I'm going to pray for you. The other posture is hands folded. This is a traditional way of praying. But if you're able to join your heart with mine in praying for someone in your life, or someone that I have mentioned this morning that is hurting, I'd ask you to fold your hands as an act of requesting from God. These physical gestures aren't magical by any means, but I find that it helps me to enter into what is happening around me. And so would you join with me now, either with your palms open or your hands folded, to pray? God, where are you right now? It feels like there's so much suffering surrounding us. Where are you in it? We need you. You are our Father. And so like a good dad, we need you to come. We need you to show us your love and your mercy. We need to feel the peace that you promise will pass all understanding in our hearts and in our minds. We lift up to you our fellow Canadians in Nova Scotia who are mourning and wrestling with the evil that burst into their peaceful lives last week. We lift up to you those who have lost loved ones over the course of this pandemic and are dealing with loss without the comfort of community. We lift up to you our frontline workers, police officers, healthcare workers, grocers and cleaners and caregivers who serve and protect and provide by risking themselves on our behalf. And we lift up those who are struggling at home, who may be physically safe but emotionally and mentally exhausted and downtrodden and lonely and discouraged. We ask for you to comfort them in ways that only you can. Your word says that you heal the brokenhearted and bind up their wounds. So God, we need you to do that. Where there is anger and hate, would you break in with love and peace? Where there is worry and loneliness, will you comfort and stay close? Where there is danger and unpredictability, will you bring safety and protection? And where there is despair and depression, will you bring hope and joy? These requests would be impossible if we were asking anyone but you, God, are more than able to turn our mourning into dancing. And so today we ask you to show up in unexpected ways for all those suffering that will delight and lavish them with your unfailing love. When it's dark, we choose to trust you. We choose to believe you are there and close even when we can't see you. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So strengthen our faith, Lord, in this dark time. Thank you for the ways you've already answered some of these requests. And God, we look forward to celebrating your goodness together in the future. Thank you for loving us. We love you too. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Tony. I am the site pastor of our Bolton congregation, and today I will be reading from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This is the word of the Lord.
Does God love? It's a question a lot of people ask. I think it's actually a question people ask even more than they ask, does God exist? It's maybe the question behind that. Like, what kind of a God is God? Does he love? Philosophers have been asking it for centuries. People ask it as they are trying to debate or understand who God is or how people might have religious faith. What kind of a God is God? And does he love? Because if he's God who has ultimate power and authority, presumably over all things, we want to know that he's good and that he's loving. And maybe even the question more importantly, that's not just about philosophy or religion, but an existential one. Does God love me? Like, is his posture or his face towards me or his actions towards me going to be loving? Is God loving, and does he love me? Even in the situation that we're in right now, as we're all kind of stuck in our homes, watching this and taking this in and trying to obey the laws of our land and have social distancing. Maybe one of the friction points you've experienced, either because you're on your own or because you're not on your own, is a lack of love in your life. Maybe you've been feeling that as you feel isolated or cut off, or maybe feeling alone because you are on your own, or even though you're surrounded with people in your own home, you feel alone. Maybe it's actually brought to light the fact that some of the relationships in your life that are supposed to be loving are not feeling so much like that. And so then when it comes to God, we're like, we have to know, is he loving? Does God love? Because if he doesn't, I'm out. Because maybe you'd say, well, I have enough authority figures in my life. I have enough people who kind of give rules, or even if God's just a wise old man on a mountain doling out advice, I can get wisdom. I can get advice from other places, but love is what I need. And maybe you're in a stage or in a season or in an experience right now where you're like, more than anything else, I need to know, does God love? And it's a question people will talk about and debate and maybe even sort of go, well, who really knows? Like sometimes people say that, well, who really knows whether you can't really know whether God is love or what God is like. So we can debate it, but no one can really know. Well, one of the things that is our premise, not only as people of God, as followers of Jesus, but in this series that we are in calling History Maker, we are saying that no, we can actually know. We don't need to throw up our hands with questions about God and say, well, who really knows? Because we have the good news of Jesus Christ. The four biographies written, and we explained a little bit last week about the genre of literature that are the stories of Jesus. It's historiography, it's biography, going back in history about the person of Jesus. And each of the writers of Jesus' biography use the word gospel, which is translated good news, the good news of Jesus Christ, in an attempt to answer for us and to say, if you look at all of history, all of the ups and downs and the good and bad of history, over the banner of history, we can actually say it is good news because of Jesus. And last week, we began with the premise that's saying one of the reasons it's good news, or the beginning point of the good news, is that God has become flesh in Jesus, that Jesus has come to show us who God is. So we don't actually have to throw up our hands and say, well, who really knows what God is like? Before Christ, we could say that. Who really knows? But that now, as Jesus has come and become flesh, he's actually come to show us who God is. So we have questions about who God is, we look at Jesus. And it is one of the reasons we're actually exploring the life of Jesus. And the premise of this whole series is saying it's not just history, it's his story that has changed your story. It's the history of his life that has changed your life and my life forever. And so throughout this series, actually, we're going to be doing some Q&R at the end of each of the messages, or just near the end. Question and response. The response may be, I don't know, good question. But there's a number there for you that you can text in as you have those questions, as you're trying to think about, okay, well, as I'm talking, and maybe there's things coming up that you can text those in, and we're going to take some time to answer those at the end. But today, we actually want to get into this question and answer. Does Jesus answer the question for us about the love of God? Like, is God loving? Does God love? And does God love me? And we begin actually the answer to this question with the title that Jesus was given by the biographies that wrote about him, that other people talked to him about, this idea of Son of God. And we actually talked about it last week in terms of saying this was the title that the angels gave him as they announced, like before he was coming to earth, they were saying he's coming as the Son of God. And if you want to go last week, there's lots of reasons we addressed as to why that was such an important title and an essential title for who he is. But what's interesting about this, Jesus as the Son of God, was not just a title, it was actually an identity. And one of the things you'll see as you read through the book of Luke, and I would encourage you, if you've never read it or if you've read it many times, to be tracking with our blog, our Reconnect, Daily Reconnect online at thewell.ca, because we're actually reading that together as a community. We believe that that's one of the ways that we're meant to read Scripture is together in community, and that what you're reading on a daily basis actually helps you prepare as you come to the weekly gathering that we have. We're going to be walking through this Luke's account of Jesus. That we find early on, Luke writes about this wasn't just a title. We see actually when Jesus gets baptized in Luke chapter 3, that the eyewitnesses around him, and Luke writes after the fact that there was this encounter where it says heaven opened and God the Father spoke and said about Jesus, "This is my Son whom I love." In other words, the very first words that God speaks in that Luke records for us is God saying, "This Son of God is my Son and I love him. I'm pleased with him." And so we see the Son of God title was not just a title, it was an identity that Jesus was the beloved Son of God that the Father in heaven loved well. Interestingly, we go on in chapter 4, and Luke begins to write about the temptation that Jesus faces from the devil in the desert. And one of the repeated sort of things that the devil is poking at, which is what he does when he tempts us, he pokes again and again over something, is if you're the Son of God, if you're the Son of God, if you're the Son of God. So there's this repeated kind of focus on Jesus, not just title, but identity as the Son of God. You know, chapter 3 is God saying, "You are my Son, I love you." And then the devil in chapter 4 is calling that into question. Are you the Son of God? Does God really love you? And we can, maybe many of us can relate to that. Yeah, that's a burning question in our minds. It was for Jesus as he was tempted with that because he was the Son of God and he called God his Father. And that's the other interesting thing is you see, not just the baptism of Jesus, not just the temptation of Jesus, but it's a repeated theme that Luke writes about as he describes the teachings of Jesus. That Jesus actually, when he was teaching his followers and they said, teach us to pray, he says, here's how you should pray. Our Father. Maybe some of you grew up in a tradition where the prayer was called the Our Father. And it's actually a beautiful name for that prayer because Jesus was not only saying, yeah, I'm the Son of God and God is my Father, you should call him your Father as well. He's your Father too. And that word, Father, that Jesus uses at the beginning of the prayer, maybe you've heard this before, it was translated from the Greek word Abba, which means daddy. It is not Father, it is daddy. It is an expression of a word that maybe if you have a child and they're having a bad dream in the middle of the night, they call out daddy. Or hopefully when my kids are still young enough, they still like me. So when I come home, they run daddy. It's an expression of intimacy, of informality, of closeness in relationship, and a spontaneous expression. And so interesting, of all the names that Jesus uses to describe God, he uses this word more often than any other. And it is interesting because if you know the Old Testament, or if you know Jewish history and their relationship with God, God had many names. He gave himself many names, and they used different names. And if you read the Psalms and the prayers that David wrote and other psalm writers, they use different names of God. And Jesus, as a God-fearing Jew raised in a God-fearing Jewish family, would have known all the names of God. And yet the one he uses more often than any other is Abba. Not only when he talks about God and to God, but he tells his followers, hey, this is how you are supposed to talk to God. He is your Father. This is actually really significant even when you consider the broader Greco-Roman context that Jesus was in. Luke was actually a Greek, and so when he's writing his gospel, he's writing to a broader audience, not just a Jewish audience. And fathers in the Greco-Roman world were not considered to be loving. They were authoritarian. They were disciplinarians. They were owners, not just of the businesses or property or whatever, but they were considered even owners of their wife and their children and their slaves. And as such, they treated them often as owners. Fathers in those days were known to be harsh and abusive towards their slaves, towards their children. And so the question of, does a father love, wasn't even a question. The answer probably would have been no in that context in Greco-Roman culture. And Jesus comes along and is talking about God and saying, he's your daddy. You can cry out to him. You can call. In fact, that's how you should address him when you talk to him, when you pray, is daddy, father, Abba. And so this is so significant as Jesus begins to explain to us and show us who God is and what God is like. But it actually creates some problems. In fact, this thing starts to come to a head for Jesus in terms of how he is describing who God is. Because as he's talking and interacting with the people around him, the religious leaders are keeping a close eye on him. And you'll find in Luke, as you read the gospel, you'll find there's categories of people that are always being referred to. There's the crowds, just the broader group of people who would have been a mixed bag of people, mixed religious backgrounds, mixed ethnic backgrounds, the general populace who's listening. There's the disciples, Jesus' inner circle, those who are following him closely, who he's teaching. And then there's the Pharisees, religious leaders, teachers of the law. You'll see, and there are different groups of people, but they represent kind of one community. They were the keepers of who God is, the teachers of the law, the Pharisees. They were the experts in God. They were the ones who were supposed to show the people who God was. They were the ones who taught the law. They were the ones that, and it was when we say law, religious law, like how you're supposed to live, who is God. They were supposed to interpret the Old Testament scriptures for people. So they were the authorities on who God is. Now you have this Jesus coming along who's not trained as a rabbi, and because his parents weren't rabbis, his dad was a carpenter and he was a carpenter. So you have this person coming along who doesn't have the religious pedigree that these other teachers and religious leaders of the law. He doesn't seem to follow the law to the T like the Pharisees did. That's what they were. They were law-observant people. They weren't official clergy, but they were just people who were considered, they were a part of a practice who were very religiously devout and observant. And they were, again, experts in who God is. And now this Jesus coming along and talking about God and doing things, miracles and power, and people are starting to listen to him and follow him. So now the religious leaders are looking at him closely saying, what's he saying about God? And they thought, rightly so in their mind, it's our job to make sure that he's representing God properly, that what he says God is like is actually what God is like. So there's a lot of scrutiny from this group of people. And they are having growing concerns about who he is and what he's saying, and in particular, what he's doing. And it comes to a head at the beginning of Luke chapter 15 when we read this. Now, the tax collectors and sinners, as one group of people, were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, a couple things you have to understand in here. These two groups of people that Jesus is interacting with. One of the groups is what's called the tax collectors and sinners. And you'll find this as a repeated theme in Luke. Even though they were different people, he groups them together. And the reason he groups them together is the tax collectors were considered the scum of society. And the reason is they were Jewish people who had been enlisted by Rome to collect taxes from their own people. And this wasn't like you think the CRA takes their pound of flesh. These were 90 to 95% taxation that Rome took from them, like basically to keep them completely poor and under their thumb, and to build the Roman Empire and the Roman roads and the Roman army, which oppressed them. And so it was so brutal that the taxes they gave was to a military that oppressed them and took their land from them. What was even worse, though, was that their own people, Jewish people, had the job of collecting taxes. And it wasn't like, sorry, guys, I got to do this. They skimmed off the top. They took more than they needed, so they were wealthy. They were profiting off the backs of their own people, empowered by a brutal empire. And so they were hated, and not just hated by everybody. The religious people were like, these people don't belong to, they're sinners. What they are doing is against God. Because if you were against your own people and like helping the empire that was oppressing your political system and your government and your military and your people and land, well, you were an enemy of God. And so the religious people said the tax collectors are the worst. And then the sinners would have included prostitutes and everybody else that they thought was unholy and cut off by God. The problem was this group of people constantly seemed to be around Jesus and listening to him and coming close to him. And even worse, they said, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now, they're talking about something really important that at first glance we go, well, what does this have to do with whether God is loving or not? But it's so important. They say here, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. And they're talking about two sides of the same coin. See, the table in Near Eastern culture in first century was probably the most important element of governing life, other than religious life in the temple, was the table. It was where you ate with people. And you're saying, of course, no, but there was no drive-throughs and people eating outside of their homes or whatever. You ate in your home, and you ate around a table with everybody in your family. Often people lived in the same home or in the same compound, extended relatives, multiple people. And so at the dinner table, the meal table every evening, was your family. And that's how you expressed love. It's how you showed honor. And in fact, who you had at your table and who you invited in either increased your honor or decreased your honor. And you always wanted more honor. So you would always only want people at your table that were your family, because you had an obligation to care for each other and say, hey, blood relatives, and people who were honorable. It was a big thing if somebody honorable came to your home and you hosted them, because that meant your honor stock went up. And so you wanted honorable people at your table, and you wanted to be invited to important people's houses. If you were hosted by somebody important, that meant your honor stock went up too. And the Pharisees and religious leaders saying there is something drastically wrong with this man, Jesus, because he welcomes them. In other words, he invites them in. Now, Jesus, we know, didn't have one place where he lived, but wherever he was the host of someone's home, he would invite these people and he would let them in. And he goes and eats with them. In other words, he says yes to their invitations to be invited into their table. And this was a huge issue for them, because at the table was not just the exchange of food and not just the exchange of sort of cordiality, but like acceptance, love, and actually a deep, intimate connection of relationship. When you eat with someone, when you break bread with someone, and some of you are from cultures where you know this is true. You don't close a business deal. You don't, do anything without actually having a meal together. Well, this was how it all worked in then. And it prompted what one Lucan scholar, New Testament scholar, Joel Green, puts it this way. He says, Jesus thus behaves towards these outsiders, these unclean, contemptible persons of ignoble status, that's how they were seen, as though they were acceptable, as though they were his own kin. Do you get that? That this is the reason the Pharisees had such an issue with what he was doing, was because this is actually like family. This is what you're saying they are. And Jesus, by doing that, was actually saying, if I represent God, by how I'm talking about who we're doing, and I eat with you, not only am I accepting you, God is accepting you. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders could not accept it. They said, this is a problem. And it says they were grumbling and complaining against him. How could he do this? Because basically what he was saying was, these people are accepted by me, and therefore they are accepted by God, which means they are your family too. Right? He's saying to the religious leaders and the Pharisees, hey, you are the people who claim you're close to God. Well, I know God as Father, and as I'm eating meals with them, I am accepting them as my own kin, as my own family, just as God does, which means that's what you need to do. And in them, they were like, no way. You cannot eat with them. You can't do this. You're extending an invitation of family, of intimacy. You are inviting them in to the household, to the family of God. And there's no way God would do that. And so they're grumbling about it. And it gets to this point in chapter 15 where this happens. It's the very first two verses in chapter 15. So you have to see then everything else that Jesus says in the rest of chapter 15 as a response to this. And in response to this, Jesus tells three stories. And the stories all have the same pattern. They're all different, each of them. Lost, found, party. Now, they're all what we would call parables. In other words, they're fictitious stories, but they were told to explain truth. Okay, so there were stories that weren't real to try to explain to people things that were real. Okay, and so they were called parables. And the three stories follow this pattern of the lost, found party. And Jesus begins first with the story, maybe you're familiar with it, of a shepherd who has 100 sheep. What if you lost one out of 100? And he says, it was almost a rhetorical question. Wouldn't the shepherd go and find the one that was lost and bring him home? And when he brings the sheep home, wouldn't he call his friends and say, come on, let's have a party and rejoice. You know, I got this 1 out of 100, still valuable. Obviously, probably a wealthy person, because the average person would maybe own 10 to 15 sheep. So this is a wealthy person, but still, you'd go get it. And they'd be like, yeah, you would. He says, that's how heaven, you'll read that in the text, heaven rejoices every time that happens. And he brings heaven, in other words, God sees this and celebrates. God's part of the party. And he said, that's how God's like when sinners come home. God rejoices. 1 out of 100 sheep. And he says, well, what if a woman, imagine a woman lost, she had 10 coins and she lost one. In other words, she had 10 coins. In other words, that's all she had. So now it's not 1%, 1 out of 100. Now I'm doing some math for you. I know some of you are studying at home. You're doing school at home. You're with me, right? Not just 1 out of 100, 1 out of 10, 10%. What if she only had 10 coins and she lost one of them? Wouldn't she do everything, sweep and light a lamp and look until she found it? And when she found it, wouldn't she rejoice and have a party? And heaven would join that party. That's how heaven feels when a sinner's found. Lost sheep, 1 out of 100. Lost coin, 1 out of 10. Okay, but what if you lost a son? That's when Jesus he sets up the first 2 stories are just so he can drop a bomb on the third one. He says losing a sheep is one thing. Losing a coin is another thing. What if you lost a son? And so Jesus begins to tell the story, and the story that was read for you earlier, and maybe it's familiar to you, maybe you've never heard it before, but either way, pretty easy to understand. It's a father with 2 sons. And it's like if we were watching a play, we said that Jesus has a father and 2 sons, and people are leaning in, listening, right? And then if you're watching a play, the older son walks off stage for a moment. And so we're just thinking about the younger son. And so the younger son comes to his father, it says, Jesus says the story, and says to his father, listen, I want my share of the inheritance. Now, it wouldn't have been a 50% share. The older brother would have gotten more of it. But he would have, if the guy owned land, he was a wealthy landowner, those were wealthier people in society, he's asking for his share. Now, this was an offensive thing even to ask, because it's not like all of it was in liquid assets. It all would have been in the farm and in the land and whatever, and the livestock and everything like that, people he rented the land to and all of that. So it wouldn't have been liquid. And so he would only have gotten his share when the father died. And so he's essentially coming to the father saying, I don't want to wait around till you're dead to get the stuff that I want. I'm actually more interested in you than in your things than you. So can you give them to me? So it's such a shameful thing for the son to ask. And in an honor-shame culture like this, he would have been slapped, maybe even killed. And we don't understand that at all in Western culture, but we hear about things like honor killings or whatever, which obviously are wrong, but they come from the idea of saying the worst thing you can do is publicly shame your parents and your parents' name. Some of you grew up in homes like, whatever you do, don't screw up the family name, right? You had to make sure that the image of the family was intact. And this was a culture that they were in. And this, if you were a wealthy landowner, you probably had other relatives that lived on that land that you hired or whatever that was part of that worked for you. And so this would have been a kind of a publicly known thing. So shameful for the son to ask, dishonorable, but he clearly was shameless and just asked. But the father says yes, which is crazy to think about. He was actually willing, he would have had to sell off some of his land and liquidate the assets and give it to his son, who then leaves. So such an act of dishonor that the son even asks, it's shameful, but he's shameless. The shame actually gets turned on the father. That the father would even do this is actually an embarrassment to him. The son is embarrassing him. And then by the fact that he leaves, and Jesus says the son goes off and spends his money on wild living. And we don't know the details of it. Apparently the older brother did. That seems to be what older siblings do. They know what the younger ones are doing. But basically we find Jesus says the guy makes a bunch of bad choices, blows all his money, and then he hits some bad circumstances. There's a famine in the land, and he has no more money, he has nothing to eat, so he ends up feeding the pigs, which for a Jewish person would have been so dishonoring. And the lowest of the low, because they were considered unclean animals. I don't know if they hadn't discovered bacon yet or whatever, but that wasn't a thing. And so this is like the lowest of the low. And think about it. Okay, so he has no money and there's a famine. There were no food banks or whatever. So if you hit this point when you had no money and no home and there was a famine, you would die. So you were close to death. And so this son is in the worst case possible. And he's not only dishonorable, he's lost, like he's physically gone from home. He's cut off from the family. I mean, there's no way he could ever come back because of what he's done publicly. And he's essentially dead to the family, to the parents. because he kind of said to his father, I wish I'd rather you dead. I would just want the stuff. But then also physically, he's almost dead. So he is in as bad a situation as he could be. In this place, probably a last ditch, he actually remembers and realizes, wait, my father's a pretty good man. He's compassionate. Even my father's servants are better off than this. Like, he actually treats his servants pretty well. They get a job and they get food. I'm about to die. I know I can't go back as a son, and I might be going back to my death, but I'm going to die here anyway, so I might as well go home. And so he starts the long walk home, and he has a speech prepared. He's going to be like, okay, I know I can't be your son, but I'll be your servant. Can you hire me? And maybe the father will have compassion. But, Luke says, whenever you see a big but, the big buts of the Bible, you got to pay attention. But the father, it says while he was a long way off, it still said but, he sees the son coming and he runs to him and throws his arms around him and kisses him. Now we go, oh, that's so nice. No, everybody watching would have been like, what? He publicly shamed you already. You brought shame on yourself by saying yes to his request, by letting him do what he was choosing to do. And now you see him. You should be sending somebody out to kill him. But you are running to him, which a self-respecting, wealthy person never ran. I guess they just paid people to run for them or whatever. But it wasn't a thing you did because they wore long robes. So you would have had to, and you don't show your bare legs. That's what he would have been doing. Running, throws his arms around the son and starts kissing him and welcoming him. And so the whole scene is like, it seems even more shameful for the father to be doing that, but he does not care, clearly, what anybody thinks. He is wrapping his arms around his son and kissing him. And the son starts with the speech, right? Okay, this is my moment. He hasn't killed me yet. Here's my moment. Okay, I know I'm not worthy to be your son, but just, can I live as a servant, whatever. The father's not even paying attention. He said, but the father said to a servant, it's like he turns around and starts yelling, hey, quick! He's yelling right back to the household, bring the best robe. The robe is a sign of like clothing, like robes that belong to the sons and to the family of the household. And put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, which probably, again, would have been because it was a wealthy family, but a sign of being part of the family. And sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. The fattened calf was something that you kept and made fat or whatever, probably could feed a few hundred people, and was for honored guests. You kept it because in case anyone dropped in you weren't expecting or whatever, which is what happened, you wanted to show them. Remember, you brought honor on yourself by who you brought into your home, and they brought honor to you by choosing. He says, bring the fat. I know what that fattened calf was for. I know what that party's for. It's for now. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The lost, found party. The father does not care what other people think. At that moment, he is so thankful to have a son. He said, I thought you were dead and you're alive again. You were lost. In other words, I didn't know where you were, and even emotionally, like relationally, you were lost, you were gone, but you're home. And he brings him into the home. This is your home again, the lost, found party. He's telling, imagine his listeners, those tax collectors and sinners who had been told their whole lives, God doesn't love you, God hates you. In fact, they were considered the damned. You're going to hell. Like, that's how the religious leaders had sort of treated them. Not only are you the scum of society, not only does everyone hate you, God hates you too. You're cut off from God. You are dead. You are lost. You are beyond hope. You are damned. And Jesus says, God actually throws a party for people like that who come home. God's actually longing for people like that to come home. When he sees people like that turn to him, which you hear the word repent that was used a couple of times, and next week we're going to talk about really what that means, but it essentially means turning around. He says when he sees people turning towards him, he runs to them and embraces them and kisses them and screams back at the house, they're home. They're back. Let's have a party. This is a son. This is a daughter. They were lost, but now they're found. This is how my father treats you. You are family. You are brought in to the household. Many of us need to hear this, right? Some of us actually don't, maybe realizing some of the unsettled feeling we have in our lives, even though we have everything around us, we still inside feel far from home. we still inside struggle to know, am I good enough? Am I loved? We struggle with looking at what we've done or decisions were made or who we are on the inside, and we can't even accept ourselves. And we have a hard time imagining that God would, more than just like, this isn't God tolerating, saying, okay, you're pardoned. I'll let it go. This isn't God bringing you in by the skin of your teeth. And somehow you did it. This is a father longing for his children to come home. And when he gets a glimpse of them, he runs to them and welcomes them in and restores them and say, you were made to be my son. You were made to be my daughter, but you've been, because of your own choices, because of circumstances, because of other things, lost. You've been far from home. You've felt dishonored. You've been gone. And I've been longing to bring you home. Jesus says that's what kind of a father God is. And so it's beautiful news for all of us, because every one of us on the inside knows there's an alienation on the inside where we feel lost at times, dead at times, far from home. Whether because the combination of things we've done or the circumstances, even if you say, no, I grew up in a family that loved me, I have love in my life, I have good friends or whatever, still there is this ache, this longing inside us to be accepted, to be loved, so, we're always wondering, how are people responding to me? Do they still love me? Do they still, I did this, how? We need a picture of a God who runs to us and says, you've made a mess of your life, and I've seen it all, but you're home, and I'm throwing a party. The lost found party. But it's interesting, the story is not just about the one son. It's not one out of two that's lost. It's actually both sons. Both sons who were dishonorable, lost, cut off, and dead. It's easy to see it in the first son, the younger son, because of what he did in the story we just described. But Jesus' story goes on. He says actually the older son, the older brother, the firstborn son, was working out in the fields, probably having to work a little bit harder because his brother was gone. And he comes home to the household, hasn't gone in, here's a party going on. Like this must have been a big feast. Like he hears it from the outside. And he asks the servant, what's going on? And the servant rehearses, oh, don't you know? Your brother who was lost, he was gone, he's home. And your father killed the fattened calf and he's throwing a party for him. And the older brother loses it. What? That's what's happened? I didn't think he'd ever come home. He'd ever have the gall to come home. And if he did, that my father would kick him out or kill him. Because that's what should have been done when he even asked in the first time. See, the older brother looked on the outside, obedient, faithful, dutiful, a good son. But in this moment, Jesus said, no, actually, there's more stuff coming out, because the father goes out to the older brother and says, hey, come in. The older brother says, no way. He says, no, don't you understand? Like your younger brother, we thought he was lost. Remember, we thought he was dead. He's found. We're having a party. Come in. And in that moment, the older brother does the same thing that the younger brother had done to the father before. He shames him. He says, forget it. I'm not coming in. It's actually a picture of dishonor as the older son. And he says, you know what? I've slaved for you all these years. We realize, no, he actually doesn't see himself as a son, right? He doesn't even call the father. The younger son, when he came home, said father. The older brother just says, he just doesn't even address him as father. And then he doesn't even address him as his brother. He says, that son of yours, this son of yours did these things. I've slaved for you. Realize actually, like, both sons were in this place of being lost. One looked like it on the outside, but the other one sort of on the inside. You could tell something was not right. This was the not having. And here's the interesting thing. By refusing to love his brother, he actually cut himself off from the Father's love. This is the key. He wasn't just refusing to come in and saying, I'm not accepting him. In the end, the story ends with the picture of the younger son who had shamed the father and left, being invited home and being inside. The older brother, who had looked like he'd done everything right, was still outside, not in. And the father twice bears the shame of his sons. He first lets the younger son disrespect him by asking for anything and like living a mess of a life. And then he lets the older son disrespect him by refusing to come in, and he doesn't slap him or kill him. He says, no, please. He pleads with him. He allows shame to come on himself again because of his love for his other son. The love of the father shines through in the face of two sons, both sons who were dishonoring and lost and cut off and dead. And he's pleading with the older brother to come in. But here's the thing, by refusing to love his brother, he was actually cutting himself off from the Father's love. He was not inside. He was not at the table. He was not sharing the Father's good things and experiencing the Father's love because he refused to accept that his younger brother could also be at the same table, experiencing the same love, sharing the same thing, and being his brother still. It's such a powerful picture of how in many different ways we can cut ourselves off from the love of God, and how even when we do, the extravagant, reckless, shameful, or shameless love of God is poured out to us. The Father is unchanging throughout the entire story in continuing to be, to the point that other people would say, that's too much grace, that's too reckless. Don't you know what they've done? Don't you see what they've done? And this was Jesus' answer to the Pharisees who were saying, look, how could you treat these people like this? He's saying, no, this is how the love of God works. And because you don't want me to have them and include them at the table, you're actually cutting yourself off from the love of God. Now, before we go to, the question of what that means for you and I, and understanding that Jesus' story has changed our story, that his life has changed ours, that his history has made ours and changed ours. Before we get there, we just want to take some time, just as you have some questions, I'm going to invite you to just listen to a song that reflects on this idea of building our life on the love of God, and that's meant to be the foundation of our lives more than anything else. But even as you're reflecting, maybe some questions have been coming up. Feel free to text those in, and then we're just going to take a few minutes and answer those.
Okay, church, let's respond together as we build our lives on the firm foundation of God's love.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing. You're worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you.
Jesus the name.
Jesus the name above every other name. Jesus the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open now my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Sing worthy of every song.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, Jesus the name. Jesus the name above every other name. Jesus the only one who could ever save. You're worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Oh, and holy, there is no one like you. There is none
Thanks, Kurt, and thank you for sending in your questions. We're going to take a couple of them here as we close. One of the questions that came in, so who then is the prodigal son? This is traditionally referred to as the prodigal son, this story. The son that ran away or the one that stayed and needed to learn forgiveness and acceptance? I owe this answer to a book that I read a few years ago by Timothy Keller, a pastor, an author in New York City. He wrote a book called The Prodigal God. And because the word prodigal means reckless spender. And so, of course, it was originally attached to the younger son who was the reckless spender and took it and wasted all of his money. But Keller points out the true reckless spender in the story is God, because both sons were honorable and impoverished, poor, right? Lost, cut off, and dead. And they needed the father to recklessly spend his love, his grace, his forgiveness, to be willing to bear the shame in a reckless way, to go out after them both, to plead with them both, to bring them home, to bring them both home. And so in a sense, like both of them were people that needed the love of God. And Jesus tells a story to say, this is the kind of God that is your father. This is the kind of love he has. It's extravagant. It's reckless to the point that other people would say they don't deserve it. And that actually brings up something somebody else said. I'm nowhere near perfect. I feel like I keep making mistakes and I'm not worthy of God's love. I think this is the beautiful conundrum that we are in. We are not worthy, and yet because of God's love, we are found to be worthy. He says in one way, yes, I am, you are an object of my love and affection, like a father with a child, so personal that he would wrap his arms around each of us and kiss us and say, no, you're not worthy, because there is, like we said last week, there's no ladder to climb, no stairway to heaven to say, well, I've done enough things, now hopefully God will love me. The truth is, friends, every relationship we have in life is almost like that, right? Like whatever we do either earns us love and people love us because of what we do, or we lose love and people reject us and all human relationships, and because of this broken world, because of the sin in our world, we all treat each other like that. And Jesus says, no, God is not like that. And we end up sometimes projecting images even of our own earthly father onto God and say, well, this is how my father on earth treated me. This is how other people treat me. He must be like that. That's how I treat myself, right? I hate myself. I'm upset with myself if I'm not worthy. And Jesus says that's not who God is. That's what's so beautiful about this story. It is the story of the reckless spending God. But I think maybe just to bring it home, as we end, the story actually isn't just about two sons. It's about three sons. It's the son who's telling us the story. Jesus, our true and loving older brother. The scriptures actually tell us that Jesus is our older brother. In the story that Jesus told about the two sons, the older brother was angry, judgmental, bitter, unforgiving, and refused to even participate in the celebration of the son, his younger brother. Wouldn't even call the father, or the son, right? Like his own brother. He said he doesn't even call his father, and doesn't even call the younger son his brother. But Jesus, our true elder brother, left his home in heaven, left all the comforts of being God to come into our world, to come after us, to bring us home. This isn't just a story of a father waiting for a son to return. It is a story of a son going out, a true, loving, good elder brother, not going out to punish us as shameful younger siblings, but to bring us home and saying, God's not counting your sins against you. Come home. You don't need to be a servant. You don't need to slave your way back into the family. You can never lose your identity as a son and daughter of God. Come home. And that is the beauty of Jesus, our true and loving older brother, by what he said, by what he did, by how he gave up his life on the cross, which we're going to talk about next week. All of this is who Jesus is, our perfect, true, loving elder brother who shows us once and for all, this is what the love of God is like. And so that leaves us in a few places. For some of us, if this is your story too, this is the whole premise of this thing. It's not just his story, it's our story too. Some of us, we need to come home. You need to come home. Maybe you realize today for the first time that God isn't waiting for you to earn your way back, that he doesn't treat you as a slave or a servant, but a beloved daughter, a beloved son, that he longs to come home to the place where you were made to be, at his table, in his family, sharing his life and his love, and with his community of other children, and that it's time for you to come home. And if that's you, you can do that right now, even where you're sitting. You can just turn to him in your hearts and say, God, I need to come home. It's time. I've been thinking this whole time I need to earn my way back to you, but I'm actually listening and paying attention to what Jesus is saying. He's my good older brother. He's telling me to come home, that you're not counting my sins against me, that I can come home, that I can turn around, that I can leave the life that I've made a mess of, right? And we all have in different ways. Some of it's very visible, like some of us say, oh yeah, younger brother, it's very obvious the mess I've made. Others of us are like older brothers. The mess is inside. It looks good on the outside, but the inside's a mess. And both of us, older brothers, older daughters, younger daughters, need to come home. And so you can pray that prayer right now because of Jesus and just say, God, I want to come home. Thank you for your son, Jesus, what he's done for me, that he is bringing me home, that he's saying you're not counting my sins against me, that I can come home, that I can turn around. That's what repentance means, and come home. Others of us, maybe we need to go find, right? That's partly why Jesus was telling the story to the Pharisees and religious leaders, saying, oh, you know so much about God. Why don't you care about people who are lost? Why don't you care that there are people out there who think that God is angry with them and counting their sins against them and has rejected them and has damned them? Don't you care? Go find them. This was the whole thing. The older brother needed to be someone who had compassion and was rejoicing in the party of people coming home. And so some of us need to say, who else needs to know this in my life? I've been keeping this to myself. Yeah, I know this is the love of God for me, but I don't care about the fact that like other people don't know that that's what God is like. Some of us need to go find. And then others of us need to join the party. And by that, I mean to let go of anger, bitterness, and judgment. Some of us, because we're like this towards other people, maybe towards other brothers and sisters in the body of Christ, we don't realize that in judging them and being angry towards them and not forgiving them, we've actually cut ourselves off from the love of God. And that maybe the emptiness we feel, the distance we feel from God is because we have rejected and we're saying, no, I'm not sharing a table with that person. Maybe there's people whom you said, I'm never going to their place again, or I'm never going to have them over, or you couldn't even imagine having a meal with them because of how upset you are with them or because of the rift between you, and it's time to join the party. It's time to actually come to the table together. And so maybe God has even put someone on your heart that you need to go out and say, I need to make this right with you. I need to confess I'm wrong. I need to ask for your forgiveness. I need to forgive you. I need to bring you home too. I trust that this morning has been a reminder, a beautiful reminder, maybe for some of you for the first time or just new in a fresh way, that this forever we know the answer to the question, does God love me? Yes, he is running towards me. He is longing for me to come home. He is welcoming me home. He has given me a place in his family at the table. If some of you prayed that to him for the first time to come home, we want you to let you know. We would just say, even if you're new here, but if you prayed this for the first time, just reach out on the well.ca and the contact page and just send us a note saying, hey, I want to know more, or yes, I actually made a decision this weekend to come home. What do I do now? Or if you're just new and you're trying to figure out this whole faith thing, or you are a follower of Jesus, but you're new to the well, we'd love you to find out that way and just log in. And then this week, just to remind you, Grounded is happening, as Melissa said earlier, 30 minutes to reconnect with God. Some of you, you're working at home, you have a lunch break, 1 o'clock, eat your lunch and log in. You don't have to say anything. You can turn your video off and just listen and let whoever's leading that Grounded kind of reconnect you to God. It's the middle of the day, middle of the week. And then if you're youth in junior high or senior high, or you have youth or you have nieces and nephews or whatever, that, we're doing that online right now. Junior high is at 7 p.m., senior high every Friday at 8:30. I just want to bless you as you leave with a reminder, not in your head, but in your heart, to the deepest parts of you, just how loved you are, that the reckless spending God has lavished his love, has recklessly spent it on you, and is still doing that even now. So have a great day. Whatever else you choose to do, I pray that the love of God will be a constant theme, reminder, playing in the back of your mind and deep in your heart. God bless. Have a great day.